When it comes to the argument of gameplay versus story, it's a very debated topic, at least in recent years. Back in the early 80s when games looked like this, there wasn't too much to talk about story-wise. But as technology advanced throughout the years, the medium of video games moved on to CDs, which meant us greaseball gamers were now treated to fancy schmancy FMV cutscenes. And just the sheer amount of memory offered in the CD format meant developers had more room to pack games full of proper world and character building. I mean, unless you were Nintendo, who was still playing in the mud with cartridges during this era. Now, of course, I'm grossly oversimplifying this. I'm leaving out things like PC gaming and the whole genre of RPGs, which already had expansive worlds and complex stories with fleshed out characters by the 16-bit era, and arguably even the 8-bit era. But the point I'm trying to make is that in the N64 and PS1 era, a lot more was expected out of video games in general when it comes to the story department. This, coupled with the ever-growing and more widely accessible internet of the late 90s, meant that this debate of gameplay versus story has pretty much been around since the start. And today I hope to answer that very question, and bring a level of nuance to the table, really get to the core and have a thought-provoking conversation, and hopefully make some of you guys self-reflect just a little. Gameplay. Gameplay is more important than story. Roll the end slate. Okay, I guess I'll talk about it a bit more. I mean, you already know my stance. I, in my own subjective opinion, believe gameplay is more important than the video game story. And to put simply, it's because the gameplay is ultimately the reason why I'm gonna replay a game. You know, I'm not playing Super Mario 64 for the billionth time because of its deep Mushroom Kingdom lore. I'm playing it again because the movement is like butter, god damn! When I wanna play a game, I wanna play the game. I don't want to sit around watching cutscenes or mashing through dialogue. If I wanted that, I would have watched a film or read a book. I'm a greasy nerd, not a fucking Melvin who spends all day in the library and daps up their English teacher. Now, I'm not saying video games shouldn't have stories, that's a bit extreme, but what I am saying is just give me the basic premise and let me play the game, you know? John Carmack of id Software and Doom fame has a pretty infamous quote on the matter. He said, and I quote,
"Story in a game is like a story in a porn movie. It's expected to be there, but it's not that important."
First of all, that's just a great quote. Second of all, I agree. I just need enough to know what's going on. You know, a little crumb of investment. Like, is this hot MILF the mom in the storyline or the stepmom? Because the answer will depend on how hard I beat my schmeat. I don't know. But this is something that Mario games actually always excelled at. What's the plot? Bitch got kidnapped again? Done. Let's play. And of course, games don't have to be super simplistic like that. There can be some story beats throughout, as long as they don't overstay their welcome. In fact, Mario Odyssey had this cute little storyline throughout where Bowser visits every kingdom and steals something from it to prepare for the wedding, like the giant ring from the Sand Kingdom or the flowers from the Wooden Kingdom. But all of that was understated. It seemingly played out in the background. And that's the point I'm trying to get at here. Video game stories work the best when it's subtle and plays out in the background, and it's not just constantly beating you over the head with cutscene after cutscene after cutscene. Like, I'm a Kojima fan. I love the Metal Gear Solid franchise, and I'll be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of Death Stranding. But there are some games in the Metal Gear Solid series where it just feels like I'm watching a fucking movie. And I'm looking at you, Metal Gear Solid 4 specifically. But that's my real problem, when the game's story is intrusive. You know, gameplay is like a water slide. It's fun, or at least it can be fun. And the story is like the line to the water slide. It's just waiting to get back down on the slide. Now, I'll admit, the older I get, the less I care about a game's story. And I think the simple reason behind that is because I'm busy. I got adult things to do, like work and attend school, and realize that I have no clue what I'm doing with my life or where I'm heading. And when 80% of my schedule is filled with existential dread, I don't have time to care or get invested in the game's story. It's kind of the reason why I think I gravitate more so towards roguelikes and distance myself from the traditional turn-based RPGs nowadays. Like roguelikes, borderline 100% gameplay. You jump right in, you die, you jump right back in. Turn-based RPGs, there's a lot of fucking reading to do, and then the actual gameplay part, there's still some fucking reading to be done. So you're probably thinking, what, stories in video games just don't work? Well, that's not true, because there's actually a time when the story and the gameplay homogeneously mix together in a truly beautiful and magical way. And that's on your first playthrough. That's when you don't care about the story interrupting the gameplay because the story is fresh and new and you haven't experienced it yet. But any subsequent playthrough, oh my god, I've already seen this shit. Let me just slash baddies with the sword. Now, of course, the argument there would be that some people just want to play the game for the story, and that's completely fair. But there's this little known thing called YouTube, where you can just look up all the cutscenes, you know? Usually there's some compilation videos or some long plays if the story is more text driven. I recognize that this would definitely be more of a valid argument in the early to mid 2000s, back when internet speed sucked mondo dick, but now, not so much. At least now games with huge story presences do have skippable cutscenes, which surprisingly was not really the norm back in the early 2000s for whatever reason. However, now there's a new breed of storytelling that has unfortunately taken over, and that's games where the story is baked into the gameplay, you know? In Rockstar games, there's a lot of drive from point A to point B while the characters talk. Uncharted games, there's these climb up rocks while the characters talk segments. And God of War 2018 has hold up while the characters walk slowly because of emotional impact or fucking whatever. And I get what they're trying to do, but I just want to play the damn game. I want to have some fun. I gotta worry about my place in the universe in the next 20 minutes. I don't have time for this. I know technically I'm playing the game during these segments, but I'm not really. But because I technically am, I can't skip this shit. So at this point, I think y'all kinda at the very least understand where I'm coming from. I like games with a heavy emphasis on gameplay, and if the game does have a story presence, make the cutscenes skippable or have the story play on the background in a non-intrusive, understated kind of way. Now that may sound like a tall order, but there's plenty of games out there that do that. Hell, the Resident Evil franchise does that. Sure, there are cutscenes, but they're never too long. And the real story comes from the journal or data entries, which are pieces of text that are found throughout the game that are completely optional and can be read or not read at the player's leisure. But the content found within these texts reveals so much more about the world and its inhabitants than any of the cutscenes shown. The cutscenes are merely there just to give you enough to know what's going on, when a solid 50% of the actual story is optional. If that sort of setup sounds familiar, that's because it's the same sort of setup that the Soul games take, and it's the same formula for the Metroid Prime games too. Hell, even BioShock does the same thing. There's a story there if you really care, but if you just want to play the game, you can do that too. To close off the video, I'll share a more nuanced take. And this goes off a previous thing I said before, where nowadays you can just watch story bits on YouTube. But the truth is, sometimes that doesn't really capture the story. Some games, sure, I mean, Phoenix Wright, play it or watch it, you're getting a similar experience. But then there are games like Majora's Mask that is so hauntingly atmospheric and filled to the brim with little memorable and tragic side character moments that just simply watching a playthrough won't evoke the same feelings as playing the game. And there's plenty of other games out there just like that. Games you truly gotta play to really feel the impact of the story that watching just won't do. Really, at the end of the day, it's an old tiresome debate, and honestly, people simply just look for different things out of video games. For me, it's gameplay, for others it's stories, and for others it's big fat anime titties.